So you did an interview with someone, or you were discussing a particular topic with that person, and they said something that you want to use in your research or your thesis or your essay as a quote to support your argument or the point that you are making, but you are stuck on how on earth are you going to reference this? Well, no sweat. In this video, I am going to show you how to reference interviews Harvard style. Whether it's an interview that you've conducted yourself or it's an interview that has been published somewhere and you found it to be very helpful. My name is Lado Kanomsa, your academic best friend from All Things Academia, where we explore and explain all things in the academic world. Interviews can be powerful evidence for your assignment, your thesis or dissertation, or any research work. But referencing them depends on how you got that interview. So there are three types of interviews: personal interviews, published interviews, and confidential interviews. I'm just going to take this time and go through each one. Personal interviews are when you have interviewed the person yourself. For example, you've talked to your lecturer or an expert on that field or a participant for your research. So in-text citation for interviews are standard like any citation. The person who've said the words or the person who've given the idea and the year of publication or the year in which the idea or the words were given. And as always, like in any source, this never changes. Here, however, you cannot have a source locator where you point to a certain page number where the words were shared or the idea was given. This was done verbally and pages do not exist. So then you just keep it to the standard citation where you give the name and the year. In the reference list, you need to give more details, and you give those details by showing that this is an interview, because not like books and journal articles that are published and hold a specific title to that body of work, the interview doesn't. Even if you're discussing a certain topic, that's not a published topic, so you cannot say the title of the interview was this, but you can show that this was an interview. So this is how you would enter it in the reference list. You will give the name of the person who said or contributed to the ideas that you've used. And by name, I mean surname, of course. By this time, we should know this. Comma, and then you give the initial of the person followed by a full stop or a period. And then you give the dates in which those words were said or those ideas were shared. And then you put personal interview to show that this was an interview that you have conducted, and you give the date which the interview was conducted. So within the brackets, you're obviously going to give the date in terms of the year. But the date that you give at the end is actually the day and the month in which that interview was conducted. So this counts as an interview in which you've spoke to the person and it's not confidential, not necessarily the interviews in your dissertation where you've got participants that you need to anonymize and pseudonymize, okay? That's a different story. But here you've just interviewed someone and you want to cite them. And if it's an interview of participants and that you want to cite someone else, you can use that pseudonym name, not their actual name. All right, but we'll talk about all of that later on. But at this stage, you need to know that this is how you put it, and this same structure you will also use for notes. For example, you want to add a point that something your lecturer said during a lecture that he or she was giving. What you're going to do then in that case, you're going to write it in the structure the same, but instead of personal interview, then you're going to say lecture, and then you're going to give the date that lecture took place, okay? In the brackets, of course, next to the name, you're going to give the year, but we also need the actual date at the end, okay? So if you want to add more details, you can say lecture on sociology 101 or lecture on economics, whatever. But then we know there was the professor that gave that lecture and the date, which is the year, and what kind of class was it, and then you can say the day in which the lecture was given. So in the case when you've got a confidential interview, and this is a case where you've got participants that participated in your research for interviews that you have run and stuff, you also need to cite in text those participants. So you can either use participant A, participant B, which is not advisable, but what's advisable is to give the participant other names, okay, which we call pseudonym names, made up names that are not their real names, because we want to anonymize them so that people cannot know who exactly we talked to. All right, so some people are very creative with this. They use maybe colors and say blue said, brown said, yellow said, and things like that. But some actually is interesting to give people real names, even if it's not their names, but give them actual names that when the reader reads can relate to that person as a person, because our minds work that way. So then in text citation, you would give the name and the date that the interview was conducted. However, when it comes to the reference list, here it's different, because if you are talking about participants, you don't need to include them in the reference list. Everything about those participants and how you gather the data and what kind of interviews we run is mentioned within the methodology section. So the methodology section in this case will hold the information that is supposed to go into the reference as detailed information, but however, it will be written up very well within the methodology section, so you do not need to include this there. And as you know, with this kind of interviews, there's a lot of ethical clearance that comes with it. And that section as well will be covered within the methodology, where you need to show that you have followed all the ethical clearance that is required by your institution. Now, let's move to the fun part, published interviews. These are interviews that have published within magazines or podcasts, the cutting edge kind of information that we're normally going for. And this is how you can cite or reference this kind of interviews. Unlike those confidential interviews, here you do not need to hide anyone's name, because this is public information. It is published already and it's already out there. Okay, so you just use it as it is. In-text citation standard, never changing. Last name of the person, which is the surname, comma, year of the publication of that source. In this case, the interview. In the reference list, then you'll have to enter it this way. You put the surname or the last name of the person, comma, their initial followed by a full stop and a period. And then in brackets, you put the year of the publication or the year in which the interview was published. And then you put the interview with whoever. So you put the host or the person who did the interview. And then you put the name of the magazine or of the source in which the interview is published. If this is a website, you put the website name. If this is a magazine, of course, you put the magazine name. And then you put the day that it was available. So this also could be the publishing day, because like when the magazines publish something, they write the day in which, because every month they've got a new publication, they write the day and the month in which that was made available. And then if it's an online source or an online magazine, you can say available at : and then you put the URL, because the URL is always accompanied by available at to show that this is the URL that you can just click to and go to that particular source. And then whenever you put a URL, you follow it with brackets, date that you've accessed, the day, the month, and the year. So that should someone click that URL and it no longer works, it's removed for other reason, people know that, okay, within this time or the stated date, it was there available, and maybe now it is no longer. So sometimes maybe you do not know the name of the interviewer, which is a rare case. Then you can just replace that by the platform that that interview was published in. So for example, if it's a podcast, you give the podcast name if you do not know the name of the host of the podcast. And then where it says name, like where you put Drum Magazine in this case, with the name of the magazine for a podcast, then you'll put the platform in which the podcast is read, whether it's an Apple podcast or you Google YouTube podcast, whatever it is. So that's how you're going to do it. So if you think this video was helpful to you, then please give it a like by clicking the thumbs up button below, and also make sure that you subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell, because there are many other videos that will be uploaded as part of the series that are going to help you reference other doc types when it comes to academia. Talking about that, interviews are a great source that is not the conventional academic doc types that we use. They add the verbal kind of information or evidence that you need for your research. But then you also get videos, reels, and clips, mostly in YouTube platforms that has a wide range of tutorials that covers a lot of topic, whether in documentary form or whether in podcast form, and that can provide great richness to the information that you are collecting for your research or for your assignment. So if you want to know how to cite and reference YouTube videos, whether it's interviews or documentaries or just a video covering a specific topic, then click the video that is appearing on your screen right now, because that is the next video in the series that's going to talk about how to reference YouTube videos and other medias. So what are you waiting for? Click on that video as I project to you love and grace in a way of 2 Corinthians 13 verse 14.